Kaity McCraw. I work at Mental Health and Addiction Association of Oregon, the organization putting on this fabulous conference. So Casey's my coworker, and actually that's my desk right behind her. The calendar is still stuck on March because I've been working from home, so which I feel very grateful to do. So let's see. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so give me just a second. Let's see. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that and just the presentation? Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Casey. Awesome. So the title of this workshop is Providing Peer Support for the LGBTQ plus community. Again, I work at MHAAO. My role there is Development and Communications Coordinator. So I'm on the admin team, not direct service. I don't know if Sage, who's on this workshop, knows this or not, but I'm also on the board of directors for an organization called the Living Room Youth, which serves queer youth in Clackamas County. So I'm really excited to be a part of that organization as well. Let's see. So to start this workshop, I wanted to give some disclaimers. So if at any time, I know that Casey mentioned you can access peer support. So we're going to be talking about some potentially triggering things, specifically suicide statistics, self-harm stuff, not in detail, mainly statistics, but still I understand that can be really upsetting for some people. So please do what you need to take care of yourself. That being said, I want to clarify there's a difference between feeling resistance and discomfort at what you're hearing and, you know, actually feeling triggered. So I want to go ahead and challenge you all to stay engaged. I specifically designed this workshop. I mean, I think that everyone can get something out of it. This workshop specifically started as part of our peer wellness specialist training at MHAAO. So I specifically wanted to gear it towards people who aren't super familiar with the LGBTQ plus community. So that's kind of why I put that discomfort and pushing through resistance disclaimer on it. And as Casey said, please write questions in the chat. So let's see. At this point, I just wanted to take a second also to introduce myself and let you all know where I'm coming from in terms of my identity as part of this community. So first of all, I identify as a lesbian. I'm also cisgender, meaning that I was assigned female at birth and still identify as femme. I also want to acknowledge that I have passing privilege as part of this community, meaning that people can't necessarily tell by looking at me that I'm gay, unless I'm being particularly gay that day. So I have that. I'm also white passing. I have white privilege. My mom is Mexican, so that's another way that I experience passing privilege. And then I also identify as a peer, but also have passing privilege in that. So basically the biggest parts of my identity are things that are unseen, you know, that I have to disclose. And so I just wanted to state that, that all impacts my experience. So yeah, I also wanted to, just to get into you know, how identities are complicated. I know that people feel different ways about the term lesbian. So and all of the terms around queer identities. I'm going to be using the word queer as shorthand for part of this community. I want to acknowledge that that is a slur, and it's or it started as a slur. It's been reclaimed by some people who are part of this community. And so it's in-group language, meaning that you can use it only if you're a part of this community. So I just want to give that disclaimer, but I'll be using the term queer. So anyway, back to my identity. Oh, yes, Casey.
You may not want to address this now, but we have a question about what is peer passing privilege.
Awesome. That's a great question. So let's see. That can look different ways. I think that some people are more, and I mean, I think this kind of passing privilege is more common than other types, but basically, you know, I identify as a mental health peer, and you know, my therapist calls me, what does she call me? Shockingly well-adjusted. So, you know, I have a lot going on, but people aren't necessarily able to tell that. So yeah. Whereas other people in the peer community maybe don't have that privilege. So I just like to acknowledge that. Back to me identifying as a lesbian. My sexuality is actually more complicated than that. I think the closest thing would be, you know, pansexual or bisexual. Some people use those terms interchangeably. I identify as a lesbian because that's primarily how I experience the world. And that is because this little lady right here, that's my wife, Claire. And that was, you know, obviously our wedding day. We've been together for 10 years. We were college sweethearts, and we met as sorority sisters. So that was a thing that happened. And yeah, anyway, my wife is wonderful. She's my main source of support. And yeah, very grateful for her every day. So also, and I'm almost done with who I am, but I just like to, you know, be radically honest about that because I think it's important. So anyway, I am married. I also am polyamorous, meaning that although my wife and I are hierarchical and she's my main partner, especially life partner, I also date. And sometimes I bring that up because depending on the nature of the relationship, those people can definitely be another part of my chosen family and support system. So I just wanted to bring that up. That being said, I have a lot of chosen family. I'm very grateful for my wife's family. They all live in Portland, which is where I'm at. And they're a huge source of support. And then I also have a sister. She's my chosen family. I've known her for 3 years. She is femme. She is also trans femme. And also, and I have her permission to share this, but she's struggling with anorexia and heroin addiction. And so a lot of what I've realized over my time working at MHAO and, you know, being her sister is how there needs to be more trans-specific healthcare, more co-occurring disorder help and treatment. That's a huge issue we run up against. So I might reference my sister throughout this. Maybe not as much as I usually do, because I'm trying to keep it short. But anyway, she's part of my chosen family as well. And I bring up chosen family because that's something that a lot of people in the queer community have. We can build networks with each other because a lot of us may have experienced, the loss of our family as a support system. So personally, I'm estranged from my biological family, except for one nephew, Caleb, who is absolutely fantastic. He's queer. He reached out to me, and we've, been in communication for the past 3 years. But anyway, I'm estranged from my biological family. They don't support my marriage, and that is such a huge part of my life that's not something I'm willing to accept into my life. So that has been a huge part of my story as well. So anyway, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Let's see. Okay, cool. So those are my disclaimers about who I am. Yeah. One sec. There we go. Okay, so this workshop is specifically about providing peer support to the LGBTQ community. I like to start with MHAAO's mission to ground you in our perspective on what peer support is and how it is relevant to the queer community. So our mission statement is that MHAAO is committed to promoting self-directed recovery and wellness for all individuals. We honor lived experiences. We support people wherever they are on their journey, free from judgment or agenda. So with that being said, self-direction is a huge part of this work and believing in self-direction. And that goes for identities, especially trans identities, and I want to honor the fact that people may have, religious beliefs, cultural beliefs about different identities and, whether they're right or wrong. So my goal in this workshop is not to change your beliefs about that necessarily. It is about helping you to compartmentalize that part while you're doing this work so that you're able to establish trust with the queer community, since peer support is basically founded on establishing that trust. It also requires checking your biases. So knowing specifically when you might be, assuming that someone is straight or heterosexual, assuming that someone, has a, partner of the opposite sex, even assuming that people are cis or identify as part of the gender binary being, male or female, and not making space for people with they, them pronouns or gender nonconforming people. Anyway, so being aware and constantly checking your biases, constantly doing that work. And basically, if you remember anything from this workshop, I would want it to be that peer support requires a commitment to not perpetuating harm. We are in this movement, we are in this work because we want to help people. We know the power of shared experience and of allowing people the space to be heard and not judged. So if you ever feel like you don't know what to do, really, I've found that just grounding myself in that is really, really powerful. So I like to bring attention to this next part is basically actually, sorry. I want to take a second, just so I know who I'm talking to, if I'm preaching to the choir here, whatnot. I want to take a second to do a poll. So Casey, could you help me out with that? I'm going to stop my screen share again.
All right, and I am launching the poll now.
Cool, and I want to say, the poll is anonymous. So I just kind of want to gauge the extent to which you all feel confident in your ability to build trust with this community. Really, that's what it's about. So, it's definitely easier if you've had the lived experience of being a part of this community, even if you're providing peer support to someone who doesn't identify the same way that you do within that community. So, yeah, I just like to know who I'm talking to, basically. Casey, how are we doing?
Can you see the results, Katie?
Let's see. Da-da-da. I can't.
All right, no worries. I can chat them. We are almost everyone. We've got about 90% who have voted.
Awesome. Cool.
All right, we're real close, and then I'll send you the results, Katie.
Awesome. Oh, all right. I'm going through and reading the chat. I wasn't reading it before. Thank you all for your kind comments. Yeah, I like to talk about my identity because I want to establish it from a very open place. I know that if people aren't necessarily familiar with this community, they might not have had the opportunity to hear a queer person just identify where they're coming from. So I like to start like that. Okay, cool. So let's see. And those are the results. Okay, so 52%, we have 56 participants right now, first of all, which is, I think, well, not technically, it's the largest group I've presented this workshop to, so that's pretty exciting. So anyway, of that, 52% identify as part of this community. 48.
Sorry, it starts over because I was waiting for some more results.
Okay, all right, here we go. So it's 48% identify as part of this community. 29% have experience working with this community. 52% have close friends who identify as part of this community. And 21% are not part of and have little experience as part of this community. So, and someone mentioned in the chat, Dana Francis says that as an ally, I profess to never knowing enough. And I definitely want to second that, Dana. I really appreciate that. As I mentioned, my sister, I am an ally to her as a trans woman, although I know that I will never fully understand what that experience is. And so I constantly have to check my own biases with that. So just in terms of things I take for granted, like I've eliminated saying dude from like our conversations, even though my wife and I call each other dude. I call my wife small dude. But anyway, my sister doesn't like that. It's like hurtful to her. So anyway, thank you so much for doing that poll. I really appreciate it, especially looking at y'all, the 21% of people who don't have experience working with this community and who aren't part of it. I really appreciate you being here. This is part of doing the work, is putting yourself in these kinds of situations. So shout out to you and to all of the whole group that's here. I really appreciate it. So I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen now. Alrighty. So working, I know a lot of this, let's see. So the peer movement is partly in response to harm that has been experienced in clinical settings, right? So I want to start out by acknowledging the harm that specifically the queer community has experienced in clinical settings, especially historically. So homosexuality was listed as a mental illness in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders until 1973. Also, the World Health Organization listed homosexuality in the International Classification of Diseases, or the ICD, until 1990, which is really recent, actually, 30 years. I'm still stuck in 2018. Yeah, so that was pretty recently. And also, behavioral health treatment is often segregated by gender, with restrictions against trans individuals specifically, often requiring them to have gender-affirming surgery. So this has been two things I want to say about this, actually. Homosexuality is a clinical term. That was the term that was used in the DSM and the ICD. So different queer people feel differently about this. I specifically don't like the term homosexual because, I don't know, that's what my dad called me, and it's been used as a clinical diagnosis. So I don't like that term. So just something to be aware of. We all feel very differently about different terms, and people define those terms differently based on their own personal experience and preferences. The other thing I wanted to say, just to elaborate a little bit more on the harm specifically experienced by the trans community in behavioral health treatment. It's a pervasive issue for sure. And this is going back to what I was saying about the importance of trans-specific healthcare. So one thing, I know that, you can't really be a peer support to your family. That being said, my relationship with my sister is my first experience with helping someone navigate addiction. And I was privileged enough to start working at MHAO around the same time that I found out that my sister was struggling with heroin addiction. So I've used a lot of these, I've been seriously helped by my coworkers and the work that they do and those peer values in helping her navigate her addiction. So that's something that was really kind of a cosmic thing starting here at the same time that I found out about my sister. Anyway, so in helping her navigate that, that's something we've run up against. I have advocated for her getting into detox facilities. I had one issue. One time we were getting her into detox, I actually had to talk to the executive director of the detox facility because he had a rule that, if someone hasn't had gender confirming surgery, they have to go with the group of people that identify as what they were assigned at birth. So he was saying that my sister had to go to the male detox. I was like, listen, sir, that is not going to happen. Kylie has trauma with men. That is not going to be a healing environment for her at all. And it reinforces just all of the negative experiences she's had with being misgendered and all of that. So I actually had to get him to change his policy on that, essentially, which only was able to happen because I had a professional connection with this executive director. So yeah, that was one example. Another example, one of the eating disorder facilities she's gone to, only 3 years ago did they change their policy on gender conforming surgery. So yeah, it can be a huge barrier for people. So I just want to start out by saying that essentially by the time they get to peer support, likely they've already experienced a lot of that harm. And so you as peer supports, if you're working directly in this field, maybe this person's, last hope at getting help in a way that honors their identity. So that's really important to remember. Specific risk factors for the LGBTQ plus community include, as I've already alluded to, stigma and discrimination, and that only increases when you have intersections of other marginalized identities, such as being part of the Black community, being Indigenous, being a person of color in America specifically. Those all contribute to your mental health and emotional well-being. Also, loss of family support is a huge thing. I know that I'm from that, and it's really a lifelong process, and people may have varying degrees to which they've been able to cultivate their chosen family or their community, and statistically this community has less social support, especially the trans community. Also, there are higher rates of poverty, unemployment, and houselessness, especially for the trans community. In terms of unemployment, there was just that Supreme Court decision that people can't be fired for their identity as part of this community, which is fantastic and long overdue. Also a surprising outcome from this particular Supreme Court. But yeah, that was just last month, I think. Another risk factor for the LGBTQ plus community is that they're at greater risk of violence, particularly for undocumented and racial minority individuals. The community that experiences the greatest risk of violence and amount of violence is the Black trans femme community. And that is because those are the most disadvantaged identities in America specifically. So that is a huge factor, and luckily something that is being talked about and entering the public consciousness due to the Black Lives Matter movement and just the general political climate we're in right now. So yeah. So specifically with the queer community and the intersection with people who are part of the queer community who also experience substance use and behavioral health issues. We have some statistics here. I'm not necessarily going to rattle them all off to you because I do want to leave a lot of time for questions. My goal is to be able to leave about, 20 minutes, give or take, at the end for questions. So anyway, but also this PowerPoint and also 3 handouts, which I'm going to go over, have already been uploaded to the app. So if you're using that, you can go back and reference these statistics. So in the US specifically, 20 to 30% of queer individuals struggle with substance use, compared to 9% of the general population. Queer youth are also 4 times more likely to have thoughts associated with suicide, such as ideation, self-harm, and attempts. 40%, 39% of queer older adults age 65 and over report serious thoughts of taking their own lives. Queer individuals who are rejected by their families are over 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than those who are not rejected. And I do identify as part of that group of people. I never attempted, but I did have serious suicidal ideation, especially when I was coming out to my family. And through that whole process, I've actually had to come out to them 3 times because I don't know, they just didn't believe me. They're like, oh, it's a phase in college, you know? I was like, no, I met my wife and the love of my life when we were freshmen in college, actually. So yeah, just having, essentially what was so harmful about that experience was Claire, and my relationship with her is literally the best thing that I've ever done. And it is fundamental to my mental well-being, fundamental to how I've grown my community and my family. And so if I'm not able to talk about that and not able to feel that that relationship is honored, there's really nothing I can say about myself or my life. And that is something that I've realized over time. I got really good at compartmentalizing and trying to eliminate things. For a while with my family, I just eliminated all pronouns. So because my wife and I did everything together. So like if I was telling them what I did that day, I was like, oh, went to the grocery store instead of we went to the grocery store, things like that. So anyway, I've realized over time that I just can't compartmentalize this part of my life like that. And that was a huge thing to reckon with. So yeah, definitely increased likelihood to attempt or have suicidal ideation. Queer individuals are also twice as likely to have PTSD than the hetero population. I also identify with this statistic. You know, I know people feel differently about diagnoses. For me, realizing that I have symptoms of complex PTSD has been really helpful because I'm less confused about why I'm experiencing different things. And it is related to my relationship with my family and trauma I've experienced as part of this community. So just diving in a little bit more to specific issues that the trans community faces, especially trans peers. Trans youth are nearly 4 times as likely to experience depression. This statistic is probably the most shocking, I would say, but really important to know if you haven't heard it. 40% of trans adults have attempted suicide, compared to less than 5% of the US population as a whole. So Jessica Carroll, one of our trainers, now the peer link director at MHAO, has shared with me that this suicide rate is not, it's higher than pretty much every population or, you know, demographic group in the US other than some Native American reservations. So just something that's really important to be mindful of. Trans individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, or POC are also at increased risk of suicide attempts than white trans individuals. So again, that intersectionality, the more you experience marginalization as part of your identity, the more you're at risk of you know, mental health and substance use issues. Trans youth are 4 times as likely to suffer from an eating disorder and twice as likely to engage in purging. as I mentioned, my sister has anorexia, and that is absolutely related to her identity as a trans femme, and the beauty standards of femininity, of, you know, being thin and dainty and delicate and all the things. Yeah, it's pretty challenging what she runs up against. And I think especially trans-specific healthcare for people who are struggling with eating disorders and you know, body issues is hugely important and something we need more of, because the reasons that trans people engage in those you know, practices and experience those issues is related to their trans identity. So it's important to address that specifically, and that's something we don't do enough. And then also 16% of trans college students have been diagnosed with an eating disorder. I know this is all just a lot, but I really just want to information dump at you at the start of this, just to really get across the issues that this community is facing and why it's so important to be able to build trust, and why that may be challenging if you're not part of this community to build trust. So I think this is my last statistic slide, but violence against the trans community is a huge issue. As I mentioned, specifically Black femme trans individuals. So 50% of, this was part of a survey done by the National Center for Trans Equality in 2015. So it was the most recent survey I could find, but you know, I'm sure that there are other surveys out there. Anyway, 50% of the 28,000 trans individuals surveyed in that specific survey in 2015 reported experiencing domestic violence. 10% experienced violence from family members after coming out. That is also something that I've experienced, although I'm not part of the trans community. 9% reported being physically attacked for their identity within the past year. I know out of the trans women that I know, and those that the trans women that I've met through my sister, every single one of them has experienced that. 10% report being sexually assaulted within the past year. I know that that statistic is likely a lot higher due to the unemployment rates for trans individuals. A lot of trans women have to turn to sex work in order to support themselves. And so that's part of why this is underreported is, you know, trans women who are doing sex work aren't necessarily, you know, there's already an issue with sexual assault being underreported, right? But trans women specifically who are engaging in sex work aren't necessarily going to report that. One of my friends who I met through my sister has lost count of the number of times she's been assaulted and raped, just right off the bat. And it's really, really heartbreaking to see the impact that has on her. So something to be really aware of. And that also contributes to why a lot of trans women don't necessarily, like, they're not going to be able to go to a place that's going to put them with men. You know what I mean? Like, that is not going to be a healing environment at all. And then this is actually a lot higher this year. I know that it's higher already than 22 people in 2020, but at least 26 trans or gender nonconforming people in the US were killed in 2018. At least 22 have been killed in 2019, and again, over 22 so far in 2020 have been killed. That is something that different organizations track because it doesn't make mainstream news, unfortunately. And a lot of this is actually chalked up to suicide, even when that is clearly not the case, especially with the Black community. So, let's see. Let's see. So at this point, I know I rattled off a lot of heavy things. So let's see. Casey, do you think there's anything you've noticed in the chat that I should be addressing? I'm going to grab my puppy right now just to kind of have a grounding moment, and because I like showing my puppy off. She's being sweet and sleeping right next to me, but this is my baby. This is Starla Fang, and she's 4 months old and wonderful, and I love her very much. Anyway, Casey, anything you're seeing?
A couple of things. So the first thing was people that are not utilizing the app. If they have a way to access those documents, they can be sent after or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to access it is going to be on our website, the Pure Apocalypse website. So after the fact, this workshop is, oh, Casey, it looks like the recording's paused.
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks. Yeah. Side note, I got distracted by the husky puppy comment about them being loud. Yes, they are so loud. So talkative. Oh my goodness. She has this scream that makes her sound like a screaming child. And yeah. Anyway. And now I got distracted. Sorry, Casey, what
You
was
were
the
talking
question?
about where to find the documents on the website.
Oh yeah, thank you. All right, where to find the documents. So Pure Apocalypse website, the recordings are gonna be posted after the fact. Let me just go to the website really quick so I can remember what that tab is called. Let's see, one sec. Pure Apocalypse conference slides. So there's a, under the Pure Apocalypse drop-down menu on the website, there's a tab called conference slides. Right now we just have the 3 previous years up, but once we have all the recordings closed captioned and everything, all of the resources that presenters have shared will also be available there. So yeah, but if you want it sooner than that, sooner than the small 4-person admin team can transcribe the workshops, yeah, you can access it on the app. So thank you for that question.
And then one more, Anne said, can you talk about trans in inpatient care? Would trans only inpatient units work better? It was hard to know how, as a PSS, to write notes with preferred names, genders, and more. When I helped create and worked as a PSS at the Crisis Assessment Treatment Center on Northeast MLK, we had many trans women stay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that would be incredibly helpful and super important if we could get trans-specific inpatient care, also trans-specific housing. Is another huge need for the community. Trans-specific counselors, trans-specific peer supports, all of that is desperately needed because a lot of the issues people in that community face are specific to their identity as trans. So it's pretty important. And then in terms of how to refer to people, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So I'll address that then. But what I'll say quickly about that for the moment is to address people the way they want to be addressed, and you can ask them that. There's something that happens called dead naming, which is when a trans individual identifies by a certain name that they have chosen for themselves, and someone dead names them when they use the name that they were given, which often is not the same gender that they identify with. And that's something that's incredibly damaging. So it's important to always honor what people, how people want to be identified. So thank you for asking that. I appreciate that.
And Katie, you've got one more. Stacy said she has a question, but it's too difficult to type out.
Okay, yeah, Stacy.
Hi. You just kind of answered it for me about how to identify them without. So my question is, like a lot of the peers that I work with don't actually communicate to me what they identify as, and so I assume it without trying to not be biased towards them, and I usually don't show any expression or anything. I just in my mind assume it. So is it rude for me to ask them what do you identify as, or what is the best way to go around that, or to handle that situation? Because even some people, I find that they are non-binary and they don't identify as he or she. So then I realize that I should be calling them they, them, and without damaging individuals more and hurting people. What is the best way to do that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for asking that, Stacy. I really appreciate that question. So let's see. You can, I see in the chat that someone said, to identify your own pronouns. That's definitely a great way to start. So that is one step you can take, because that shows the person, the peer you're supporting, that you're aware of pronouns and the importance of disclosing them, and that can help to build trust. The other thing that I want to note is that people feel differently about being asked their pronouns. I think especially in group settings, some discomfort can arise for trans or gender nonconforming people, because they might be the only person in the room who uses they, them pronouns. And basically, it can feel to some people like having to be outed without them choosing. So if I'm ever addressing a group, I'll say that, if you want to share your pronouns, you can. And, making space for that is important. And then also, if someone doesn't disclose their pronouns to you, and well, I'll note, we'll talk about that later, actually, in the interest of time. But also, if you're gonna have to take notes on this person, I would disclose that and say, that you're gonna have to take notes, and that's the reason you're asking for pronouns, so that you refer to them correctly. Also, if you're gonna try to help them find housing or anything like that, it's important for people to, for you to know how they identify, so that you can find help that's specific to their needs. So yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate the questions. Yeah, let's see, one sec. So at this point, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so the key takeaways, I think, and I know that we're not done yet, but to kind of summarize that and what I've been saying, I think these are the key takeaways. The important things for peers to remember while they're doing this work. So building trust with this community requires a commitment to not perpetuating harm. When you interact with peers who are part of this community, validate their identities and honor their lived experience. Everyone is the expert on their own experience, right? And that is one of the fundamental values of peer work and the peer movement. The same goes for people with lived experience being part of the queer community, especially lived experience of trans and gender nonconforming people. So basically, just take them at their word about their experience. And if they choose to share more about their story and that part of themselves, honor that experience. Don't question it, right? And then, as I said, you can ask people how they identify and respect that identified, talk about them, refer to them on their terms, Don't ask invasive questions. We'll talk about that more later. And understand that there's no right way to be part of this community, part of the queer community. There's no right way to be a trans person. Everyone is individual in their experience, in the way that they identify and in the way that they use different terms, definitions. Words are not stagnant, they're constantly changing. And I know that can be confusing for people outside of the queer community or even people within the queer community, actually. So yeah, just remembering that there's no right way to do it. We're all individuals. And then listening, another fundamental peer support value, just creating space for people because, and listening and building trust, listening without judgment, those are the takeaways that I would say. So we'll go at this point to some of the handouts, and I'm gonna share my screen for the handouts. I see that someone in the chat asked me to drop a link. Let's see. So I will actually go ahead and do that also. One sec. Desktop, downloads. Alrighty, so this is the link to the PowerPoint. I have, okay, here's a list of, here's the link to the definitions, actually. And the definition sheet starts with an acknowledgement. So while I'm dropping these links, actually, Tiffany, I see that you have a question that's also involved. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. I think this is a good time to do that.
Sorry, I forgot my microphone broke and I have to put on a headset to talk. So,
oh no.
Yeah. So I do peer support for Yamhill County Mental Health. I don't know if you're familiar with Yamhill County. It is a very rural community. And I started my peer work first as doing volunteer stuff through a place called Project Able, and they were in Salem is the mothership, and then they have one here in McMinnville. And I ended up having, and because they were told apparently that I did really well with the LGBTQ plus community, I ended up having a large caseload of folks like that. And then when I got the job at Yamhill County facilitating groups, I'm the illness management and recovery specialist, I realized that we have a lot of LGBTQ plus people in this rural community, but no support group, nowhere for them to go, no place, and they all feel like they're alone. And I see like maybe 6 of them a day, and they all, I know where they all are. And so I've been trying to push, I don't mean, I feel like I'm saying maybe the wrong way or saying it the wrong way, so I apologize, but I'm wanting to start a support group, and the clinician who is my lead along with my supervisor are worried that if I don't go through some sort of huge specialized training to start some support group, that we're going to do more damage than this small rural community may have already done or does do, because of the lack of understanding in this community. And I was just wondering if you had a suggestion on some trainings and or your thoughts behind just kind of opening it up and just facilitating it, but letting them kind of lead the way. I get what they're saying about not doing more harm, but I feel like especially with the county, things take so long. It could be another year before they do that for me and for them.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that question, Tiffany. I appreciate it. So I guess what I would say with that, I'll probably want to, let's see, I'll write down a list of trainings, and also that'll be available on the website. So I'll do that. And you said you're in Yamhill County, right? Okay, cool, yes. So that I can take care of separately. In terms of starting the group, I would say that it would be an issue and would probably perpetuate harm if you were to lead it as someone who wasn't a part of that community. I think that is separate from facilitating or creating space for a support group for people who identify as part of that community. So I actually think that's a fantastic idea, especially if your voice as someone outside of that community isn't taking up a lot of space, you know? So that's what I would say. Thank you for that. Oh yeah, the Living Room, which again is the organization that I'm on the board of, offers some great trainings and resources for both youth and organizations also. So that is a thing. And then again, I just dropped the links to those documents in the chat. They're also available on the app and will be available on the website. So that would also probably be a good place to start, and just maybe having conversations with your team about that and discussing those things. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. And let's see, Cool, all right. So do you just see the list of definitions right now? Casey? All right, cool. Sweet. So actually, I'm not going to go over the definitions right now. What I will say, I'll read this first bit, which is that the list is not exhaustive. It's meant to be a general guide to commonly used terms. Language is fluid and it changes over time. It's also regionally and culturally specific. So the definitions of those terms are open to debate and interpretation, especially by people within the community who use those terms to refer to themselves. So it's important to remember that when interacting with individuals in this community, to allow them to self-identify and to honor and reflect back the language that they use to describe themselves. So I wish that we had more time to go over the definitions specifically. Usually when I do this workshop as part of the peer wellness specialist training, I make time for that and for people to ask questions. That being said, I will go ahead and drop my, actually, Casey, if you could type out my email address in the chat. I always welcome people to email me with questions after the fact. More than happy to talk about all of this. It's something I'm really passionate about. So I'll say that on the definitions. Since this is about building trust, I wanted to go over this handout again to just kind of reiterate the key things that I want to get across here. So the first that I have is not to make assumptions about anyone's identity, about your peer's sexual orientation or gender identity. Don't assume pronouns based on how you read their gender expression. And misgendering a person or correctly assuming a person's sexual orientation breaks away at that trust. And if that's something that you do from the outset, it can be hard to overcome. So really just starting to practice that every time you meet a new peer, when you're interacting with people, I would say that that is something really to be mindful of. Also knowing that there's no one way to act or look like a given identity. So everything's a spectrum, but the legitimacy of a person's identity is not a spectrum, right? That is for them to decide. So specifically, an example would be a person who's transitioned with hormones and or various gender confirmation surgeries, such as a vaginoplasty or top surgery or the trans mask counterparts of those surgeries. Those people should not be understood as more trans than someone who identifies as trans but has not taken or doesn't want to take that path of gender confirming surgeries. Also, it's important to ask why you need to know. And so that specifically can help you reflect on how appropriate your own curiosity is and help you keep from crossing people's boundaries. Also be understanding and flexible as people process their gender identities and sexual orientations at their own pace. Work on understanding that there's flexibility in identity, even if it's confusing to you. That goes back to the definitions, right? So some people would disagree with me. Actually, I've had a lot of queer femmes disagree with my use of the term lesbian because I do date men sometimes, although that's getting less frequent for me. But that is, you know, as someone who's married to a woman, as someone who, you know, not everyone knows that I date men, that's the main way that I experience the world. And so it's a political identity for me, even if it's not necessarily fully encompassing my sexuality, right? Also with the being understanding and flexible, people's pronouns may change, you know, in the course of you working with them, and that is valid. That is okay. You know, some gender fluid people, which is on the definition sheet, their pronouns may change and their gender presentation may change over the time that you're working with them. So really just paying attention to that and honoring that there is fluidity in sexuality and gender presentation and gender identity, and being flexible. Using respectful language at all times is another really important tip. Trying to avoid gendered language, I would say, is important. Different people feel differently, but things like, oh, dude, you know, if you're talking to a trans woman, could be harmful. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. The easiest way to make sure that you're using respectful language at all times is to do that consistently, not just when you're working with a peer. You know, and then it's authentic self-work. One thing I did, my wife's little sister, who I met 10 years ago before she transitioned and before she changed her name, she just came out to the family last year. And that was something that since, you know, I met her when she was younger, pre-transition, that I had to be really intentional about changing my pronouns, changing the name that I referred to her as. It was something my wife and I had to work on when, you know, she wasn't present, and we had to correct ourselves all the time. You know, it was a process, right? But it was a very important process that we did without being in proximity to her, where we could, you know, harm her and her identity. And so one of the things that we did, initially she was using they, them pronouns. And so we didn't mess that up. We eliminated gendered language from our conversations entirely for everything. And that was really helpful. So that's a tip. If you're uncomfortable using they, them, get comfortable with it, and kind of try to force yourself to not use gendered language. Also, never out your peer. So be cognizant of when they would like you to do, like the next point says, a warm handoff, identifying them as part of the community, or if they don't want to disclose. Basically, it's on your peers' terms, right? The last one, second to last one actually, to do your own homework. So not to depend on your queer peers to educate you. Unlearning implicit bias and gaining skills to support this community is a continual process. It's not something you can check off a list and move on, especially because these identities and definitions are evolving as the culture becomes more accepting. You know, the first pioneers of the first people in the movement were, you know, gay men, right? Because they had the power to be public about their identity. And then as things became more accepted, there has been more language about it, especially, you know, in English, in like the American culture. I also want to honor that gender nonconforming identities have been a part of human history since always. And that's important to know. It is not a newfound thing. So do your own homework. And most importantly, I would say this is the biggest thing for establishing and building trust, would be if you mess up, acknowledge your mistake, move on quickly, and center the needs of your peer and not your own needs. Something that happens a lot with, I'll come back now because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. You know, when you mess up, right? And we're all going to mess up. I mess up still. center the needs of your peer. There's something that can happen where you're like, oh no, I didn't mean it like that. And you like ask for reassurance that they know you're a good person. That might look like, oh, I'm sorry. Like I have a trans friend. Like I'm cool with it. Like don't do that, right? Like if you need to, my wife calls it getting cookies, if you need the cookies of knowing that you're a good person and like, getting that validation, go to that friend or someone else who you have an established relationship with and ask for those cookies there. In the moment, focus on addressing those peers' needs. So sorry I didn't leave as much time for questions as I would have liked to, but at this point, I think I'm going to skip the microaggression tip sheet, but it is really helpful, I think, and also pretty self-explanatory. So there's that. But yeah, Casey, if you're able to like look in the chat for questions that I might be able to address right now, I think now's a good time for it.
Sure. I haven't seen any since we last did questions.
Cool.
There, let's see, have been some comments about the phrase preferred pronouns that Carlos shared.
Mm-hmm.
You want to read that or you want me to read that loud?
Let's see. Yeah, if you could read that out loud, that'd be helpful.
So Carlos shared just something to share with folks who are unfamiliar. Many trans individuals feel uncomfortable with the phrase preferred pronouns as it implies this is a preference, not a part of their identity.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Carlos. I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm not sure if that was in the documents that I shared, but I actually do want to edit that. So I'll take a look for that because I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you. That's something that I've heard too. But yeah, it's not a preference, right? Like if you identify as cis, as I do, it's not a preference that I'm referred to as she, her. It's my identity. I'm okay with they, them because I believe that, the gender binary is a construct, right? But I do identify as femme and with feminine energy. And so, yeah, it's not a preference. Let's see. Thanks for the dog. I'll bring her back just to close this out because who doesn't need cuteness and happiness and joy right now, right?
If anyone does have any questions, now's a good time to put them in the chat.
Totally. Thank you. Okay. Cool. Thanks, Carlos. I appreciate that. But yeah, definitely important. Let's see. What's the dog's name? The dog's name is Starla Fang. She has an Instagram for those of you who wanna follow. Just gonna do a little plug for that.
What's that, Katie? Starla Fang?
It's at Starla Fang. Thanks, Casey. Yeah, and I can't get mad at her for chewing things because I named her Fang, so that's on me. Yeah, let's see. Again, just please email me. I want to say no one has taken me up on it yet, and that makes me a little bit sad. So if you have more questions, I'm totally happy to, do a phone call, do a video chat, talk over email. This is something that's really, really close to my heart. And, as a queer person with pretty thick skin, I would say, I'm up for whatever question you want to ask me. And, I would just ask that you try to be respectful and come from a place of like genuinely hoping to understand. But yeah, I'm not gonna get mad at you if you like don't phrase something correctly. I'm gonna just help to educate you and hopefully answer your questions. So yeah. Aw. Thanks for all the love, y'all. I really appreciate it. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool to see. I'm glad that people learned things, and you know, this workshop could definitely be like an all-day thing, an all-week thing, you know. It's taken me a lifetime to figure myself out, and that's just one person, right? So, and I haven't even figured that out, you know. So just scratching the surface, but really it just comes down to understanding that this community is at specific risk. And so building that trust as a peer support is just so important. And you can do that without knowing all the alphabet soup and like memorizing all the definitions. What it's about is listening to people and using their language. Cool. Thank you, Huck, for asking about the pronouns. Is there a better way to tell or explain our own pronouns? I know we're almost at time, so this will be the last question that I look at. Speaking as a trans man, it has been hard sometimes when people aren't familiar with the LGBTQ plus community. So I think, first of all, grounding every peer relationship in the agreement that we all are living life, like our identities are ours and we are the experts on our own life. So just making sure to say like your identity is not up for debate. My identity is not up for debate. I want to come from a place of mutual understanding and respect, and I would hope to expect the same thing from you. So yeah, that's what I would say. So now we're at time, but I really super enjoyed this. I love doing this workshop. I feel really energized after every workshop I do, which is saying a lot today because, you know, as part of the admin team for MHAO, it's been a pretty exhausting month. So yeah, just thank you all for being amazing and for giving me an energy boost. It's great. It's a great way to start the day.